Welcome to the final episode of Beyond the Surface. I'm your host, Ezer Gill, and here we aim to have God-centered, meaningful conversations relevant to students and young adults. For our final episode, Ryan and I share our closing thoughts on the show and give a personal note to all of our listeners, past, present, and future. As a reminder, all our previous episodes, seasons 1 through 3, are still available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, so feel free to listen back on any episode you may have missed. Thank you for joining us for the finale. We're so excited to finish strong this season of Beyond the Surface. All right, Ryan, this is it. This is the season finale of our third season and our final season. We just kind of wanted to take some time just to give our closing thoughts on this podcast, on us, on our listeners, and end this on a bang. And, you know, I just think back to the day when you called me, or I think you texted me, you asked me if I wanted to do a podcast with you, and we met up at Water Street and we were in our car and we were just sitting and talking. And I remember just thinking like, man, are we actually about to do this? And I still think to a degree we were kind of in over our heads and had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. But I actually thought that was kind of the beauty of it, that we were just taking a leap of faith and going into something brand new, something neither of us had ever done, but we just went for it. And I know we've asked this a million times before, but again, just why? Why a podcast? Why you? Why now? Why come back to it after leaving it? Just give us the why.
The original why was just podcasts were a form of media that I largely consumed, and I felt like I had a good story, or I was in the middle of a good story. I guess I'm in the middle of a good story that God's writing, and I just wanted to share that with people. I was really in a time, and I'm still in a time of growing my faith and growing in my relationship with the Lord. And I wanted other people to see kind of what God was doing in my life. And I wanted to encourage other people essentially in their walk with the Lord. I wanted to be really real with people, and just that like I was struggling with some things, struggling with my calling largely was like kind of the theme around our podcast, all 3 seasons really. So I think that was just kind of the why for me, is I wanted to put something out there that could maybe help people that were going through a similar situation of like, I'm not really sure what I want to do, or maybe I do know what I want to do, but it's taking more time, or it's not working out the way that I wanted it to. So I just felt like it would be an opportunity for me to encourage somebody, and I hope that it did. We have received some testimonies from some people that have said it's been really encouraging, and we really appreciate that. We appreciate everybody who reached out and said those things. That was just kind of my why, was that I felt like God was doing something in my life. It took more time than I had anticipated or I had wanted. But again, I think that that's kind of where the power of the story comes from, is that it didn't just happen easy for me. And so that was really what I wanted to do, was just kind of help share my story in an attempt to help people walking through something similar.
I remember you would kind of explain that out to me, and to be completely honest, at the time I didn't really have too much of a determined why, other than I just think this guy Ryan is really cool, and I think what he's doing is awesome, and I just kind of want to help him out. Whatever he's doing, maybe I can do the little things to make it a little better. I can just do my part just to help him out in any way possible. I never really thought of myself getting so hands-on with this. I never really thought I would get so involved with editing and with the thumbnails and with the episode titles and inviting guests. I kind of, saw this more as your project, but I think it was really beautiful that we kind of went half and half on it. And I think the first season you really oversaw that. The second season I oversaw that. And this one, I really think we really both just gave it our all. And uploading twice. We used to only upload once a week. Now we uploaded twice, which was definitely a stretch for us. Not to give ourselves a pat on the back, but I really just think we left it all out there on the field regarding this podcast. And we really just went out with a bang and just gave it our very best. And I think our third and final season was probably some of the best episodes we've ever done. Going back to when we had started, I remember we sat down at your house. I don't even think we actually had a title yet. We weren't Beyond the Surface yet. We were just like, hey, let's just start recording episodes and let's see how they sound, and I'll start editing. And again, we were in way over our heads. We had no idea what we were doing. We were just doing it. And we had our Xbox microphone, which surprisingly did not sound all that bad. We definitely have some better gear now. I just remember that was just so much fun that we were just doing it and had no idea what was on the other side of that.
And I think it's cool that, like you said, we both kind of invested in this. You know, we upgraded some of our equipment. We both spent time doing the editing, and you really owned a lot of the content creation and that after season 2. And even in season 3, you know, you had so many ideas, and, you know, you love to do kind of the creative stuff of coming up with titles and episode descriptions and things like that don't come as naturally to me. So it's just cool that we both kind of owned it and did it and have stuck with it this far. Season 3 was definitely a stretch. I know, not necessarily in the amount of work. I don't think it was overwhelming in the amount of work that it was, but just like content creation and the ideas for episodes and that kind of thing doesn't come as naturally to me. And so I started to get to the point where it was like hard for me to come up with things, you know, like we both talked, we don't necessarily feel called into ministry. I definitely am happy to share my wisdom and, you know, talk to people and things like that. And I'm always learning and trying to grow and whatnot. But that content creation of the ministry bubble is just hard because, you know, that's not where God's called me. So that's just not where he's graced me. I think he did grace us with a lot of really good content for the podcast. Again, we appreciate everybody who reached out and just said, hey, you know, I really like this episode on that. This episode was really something that I've been struggling with, and I really appreciate you guys being vulnerable and talking about it.
We are so grateful for all the feedback that we have received. Honestly speaking, the encouragement and the feedback and the testimonies is what kind of motivated me. There were some weeks where it was really hard for me to do editing, and I was low on sleep and low on time. And, you know, there were some weeks it was pretty clear that you could tell that we were a little lazier on editing. But I just remember sometimes I just kind of felt as though, is this even making a difference? Is anyone going to listen to it? And then right then I would see and hear of a testimony of someone saying how much this episode encouraged them and how the latest upload or an upload from 2 years ago encouraged them. It just motivates me. I think there's something so powerful about encouraging someone. And that's, you know, I want to do my best to encourage other people and encourage my pastors and my leaders and anyone who is serving me and helping me, just to encourage them and just to give them just that motivation. And because I know what it's like to kind of be a little tired, and then having that encouragement come right at the right moment, just giving me that motivation to finish strong. And I was super grateful for that. Being a content creator, I'm totally with you on that. Being a content creator it's a challenge that you got to really be creative. And I think that's kind of where I really excelled. It's definitely difficult for sure to come up with ideas and to be creative and to think, okay, what if we did an episode on this? What if we invited this person, but we kind of split it like this, and coming up with ideas on the fly. It's given me a greater respect for content creators out there, particularly people who leverage their platform for the gospel and for their faith. I know people that do this full time and do ministry full time, and whether it's in the church or whether it's their own brand or something, that do this full time. It's like, wow, like I now know what that's like. I never did it full time. We never monetized our podcast or anything, but it gave me just a greater understanding and a respect for people who do this. And I don't know, like it's also even given me like them a little grace. Audio quality didn't sound as great over here, but I know what that's like because, you know, we've had some episodes with not great audio quality or just little technical things like that.
But do you ever wonder, like, what if we would have promoted it on social media more? Like, this is just kind of a hypothetical what if for anybody out there who's thinking about doing something like this. Do you ever wish that we would have pushed harder to try and grow it?
I was definitely happy with it being a side project, and I found a lot of satisfaction in that because I'm the type of person that, like, I don't need like a huge amount of people. I kind of just really just need a few people, you know, a few people who are really being ministered to, encouraged by it. And that's enough for me to give me that satisfaction and that motivation. I remember back when I actually did have social media, I did promote it, and I promoted it a lot. I was all the time putting little clips and little graphics and images, and I would clip out a segment of our episode and upload that to social media, which took some time in that. But one, I was able to promote the episode and get some listeners from that. But I think two, even people, if they didn't, you know, actually click and listen to the podcast, they were at least ministered to by that little clip from it. So I did do that. I think that just kind of goes back. I just, social media in general is not really something I'm all that passionate about, even if it was perhaps growing our audience. And I there were people that did hear about our podcast and listen to it from the promotion that I was doing. But it's not really something I'm all that passionate about. And perhaps we would have gotten more listeners in that sense, but I really just think of the listeners we're going to get in the future, because we may be done uploading, but these episodes are still going to be out there. They're going to be out there for as long as internet exists or something. You know, I just think so much about our lead pastor. She wrote a book. It's one of the first books she's written, and it's really become like a foundational book for our church and all around the world. It's been translated in literally dozens of languages. The thing is that it's her most sold book. Publisher says it's one of their most sold books, but it's never been a New York Times bestseller. It hasn't like had this big spike of popularity, but it's just been over time. She calls it just little drops in the bucket every day, a little drops in the bucket. When I look at our analytics, and I'm not huge into the numbers, but a lot of our listeners are not coming from when we're uploading and when we're actually uploading, but a lot of them are coming from over time and just little drops in the bucket. You know, someone randomly finds our podcast. I remember I got this testimony from someone, I hadn't spoken to him since high school, and he just randomly reaches out to me. He's like, hey, I found your podcast randomly. I was on a car ride and I listened to every single episode and I was so encouraged by it. I'm like, dude, I haven't spoken to you in like years. Like, are we really that good? To an extent, I had some imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not even sure we're really all that good. People are telling me like, no, you actually are that good.
At the end of season 2, we did start to gain some traction and we did start to gain a little bit more of an audience base. That was actually like the last 4 episodes of season 2. We had like the most listeners that we ever had on the show. We had the most plays, the most clicks. And I was never really that interested in that. Part of me says that, you know, the more clicks and the more views you get, like the more successful it is. You know, like how else do you measure it, I guess? It's hard to quantify anything else. So like that's just like the hard numbers. But all I wanted it to be really was just a place to like put my story for people to hear and to share with, you know, people that I come across and just say, hey, I did this podcast and, you know, I think based on what you're telling me, you maybe would get some benefit from this episode or something like that. We just really appreciate everybody who listened throughout the whole thing. Like if you are listening right now and you listen back in season 1, like you're an OG, we really appreciate that. And we appreciate it too if you just clicked on for season 3 and you've enjoyed the ride with us so far. But it is cool to hear, you know, people who've listened like all the way through.
Ryan, I want to ask you, what were some of your favorite episodes or favorite moments or just favorite experiences doing this podcast? Maybe it was a funny memory while we were recording, or maybe it was just an episode that you just thought was really solid. You know, just kind of share us your thoughts.
Season 3 was just really cool because it was kind of like our stories completed for the time being. You got the job that you wanted and I finally got into medical school, whereas the first 2 seasons were us working towards that, dealing with delays in that, I guess you could say. The episodes at the beginning of season 3 where we get to share God's faithfulness manifest in our life was really, really special for me. But there are so many moments that I remember editing and listening to what we said, and not everything always made it into the release for the episodes, but there were just many times where I listened back and had to laugh because I was like, I can't believe we actually said that, or I don't remember, you know, saying that, or I don't remember Ezra saying that, and it just makes me laugh. And a lot of those things had to get clipped out, but they were fun. But yeah, there are a lot of good memories from doing the recordings and that, and there are a lot of good episodes. You know, I think back to Alone, that was like one of our first episodes that we ever released, and just how real that can be and how frustrating that can be. That was one that really sticks out. And then singleness, obviously. We're both really content being single, and we both believe that it's a really important season. And I don't think that it gets talked about enough, and I don't think it gets emphasized enough in the church in the right way. I think that it's important that we champion people who take their singleness seriously, and we encourage people to take their singleness seriously. So I'm really happy that we spent so much time talking about that, even if we maybe sounded like a broken record doing it. You know, I just think that it's something that gets really overshadowed, and I think that it's super important for believers.
Overall, just the very beginning, when honestly, Ryan, you and I didn't know each other all that well. This podcast is how we actually became close friends. But when we had gotten started, we were just kind of pretty good friends. I mean, we knew each other through church and everything, but we weren't actually like close and revealing all these things about each other, about our celebrity crushes and all these things. And it was just a really funny and just great time just in the beginning, and just seeing our friendship grow as a result of that. Like, if nothing else from this podcast, I made a friend. But I'm definitely with you. I think Alone was probably one of my favorite episodes. It was our second episode. It was great. Yeah, we were still on the Xbox microphone, if I recall. But I remember that episode I was actually listening back to it. I listen to our own podcast. Yes, I do that. I'm a narcissist, whatever. Not to give ourselves a pat on the back, but like, honestly, like I thought that was like really solid, especially being our second episode. And as we were podcasting more, and as we had been doing it for longer, and as we were growing in our skills of editing, and as we were growing in our skills of podcasting, the overall time to edit started getting lower because we were becoming better podcasters and speakers, but we were also becoming better editors, and it started to get a lot quicker. But I remember recording the season 1 finale. It was a 2-parter, and we recorded it in one sitting, and we recorded that over Zoom because I was traveling. I was visiting some family, and I remember I was at my aunt's house, and I was inside of a closet. And I was so dedicated to the podcast that I would go inside of a closet away from all the noise so I could record this episode. I remember being exhausted after that recording. I remember like you and I were like, oh wow, that was a lot of recording, but we talked all things leadership, and I just remember like I was so encouraged by our commitment to this podcast. We knew that God had given us this platform, big or small, whatever it was. We knew that God had given it to us, and we were giving it our all. Let's see, season 2 had some great moments with a lot of guests. The episode we did in season 2, Made in His Image, was just a really fun episode to record. It felt like we weren't talking anything too crazy, but it was just super fun. From this season, producing Perseverance was, I think, the peak. That embodied the journey of this podcast, because everything we were praying for in seasons 1 and 2 had finally come to fruition. So I really love that episode. And just overall this season, I think the season was so much fun. And Ryan, why don't you actually tell us real quick, how long did it take you to edit that first episode? I think they need to hear this.
The first episode that we ever released, I think it was like in between 20 and 30 minutes. It was not that long. And I easily spent 3.5 hours, probably closer to 5 hours. Like I sat down and I just totally expected that it would kind of be like a listen through and then it would be all good, but that was not the case. I had to edit a lot of things. We had a lot of ums and a lot of stutters and a lot of awkward pauses, and we didn't really know what we were getting into. We repeated ourselves many times. I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of adjusting audio quality and trying to like mix things so that it sounded a little bit more pleasing to the ear. The learning curve was really steep, and then Alone was more like another 3-hour long editing session. And kind of as we got better at speaking and playing off of each other and learning like, okay, he's starting to wrap up and this is where I'm going to jump in, or, not talking over each other as much. We did that a lot in the beginning as well. Those kind of things, the editing time really shrunk. And then also you just practice it and you get better at it. And so like when you get to that point of the editing where it just becomes a lot smoother and a lot easier. And then also I was able to, I think, progressively just get better at making the audio sound good, to the point where we're really just limited based on how clearly we speak into the microphone and how good we do at controlling volume levels with our microphone settings pre-podcast. So that's really what we're limited to, which I don't know that we ever really figured that part out fully, but that's neither here nor there. So
I am just relating to everything you're saying on such a personal level. I know what you mean on that. It would be so cool if someone listening to this is going to start their own podcast and be encouraged by us and our ability to try something new and just to go for it themselves, and for other podcasts to be birthed out of this, or maybe not a podcast, but a YouTube channel or something where people are putting themselves out there. And you were kind of getting into this a little bit, but let's say someone is considering putting themselves out there in the form of a podcast. They feel God pressing them and calling them to do this. What kind of advice would you have to give them? What would you perhaps tell yourself back in 2019 when you were about to start this podcast? What would you say? Just everything from editing, from coming up with topics, to finding a channel partner?
The most important thing is just kind of what we did, is just to get going. I just recently watched a video on how to start your own YouTube channel. That may or may not be a precursor for anything later in my life. Who knows? The 3 points that he made in the video was to get going, to get good, and then to get smart. But you have to do them in that order. So the first thing, the most important thing, is just if it's on your heart, just do it. Like Ezra said, we started recording with an Xbox headset microphone. We didn't have fancy equipment. Like you heard with my editing, we had no idea what we were doing in terms of the editing. We just had a idea for the focus of the podcast in terms of like what kind of content we were going to produce in a general sense. And we knew that it was something that we wanted to do. So we just went for it. And then you got to just learn the rest of it kind of as you go. And so you'll get better with time. Some people talk about like quantity versus quality, and that your quality just comes from quantity. There was a study done in the UK and it looked at pottery. It's just super interesting. You're probably like, where is he going with this? So there was 2 groups and they were all judged by the same judges, but the judges had no idea which group was which group. So in one group, they were given 30 days to make one pot, and they had to make it as good as they possibly could, as like perfect to the specifications that they could. Then the second group had to make one pot a day for 30 days. So the judges picked which were the best pots, and all 5 of the best pots came from the group that had to make one every single day. So the more you do things, just the better you're going to get at them, and you're going to get better faster by doing that than like worrying about, oh, well, I need a microphone and then I need to watch all these YouTube videos on how to edit things. And like, yes, those are helpful, but the biggest thing is just that you're going to learn by doing. You have to fail. You have to put yourself out there. And just if you think I want to get 1% better with each episode release, you'll make a lot of gains really quickly. And then I think like to just reflect and determine how serious you are about it at some point, give yourself, if it's a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever, give yourself, 10 releases or so. Maybe you need even a little bit more than that. And then step back and say, how committed am I to this? Is this worth it for me? If it is worth it to keep going, how casual versus how serious do I want to be with it? And just kind of determine what's going to be right for you and your schedule. Obviously, Ezra and I said we just wanted this to be something casual. We meet once a week and we do recordings, and then with the 2 episode releases a week, Ezra edits one of those episodes and I edit one of those episodes a week. So all in all, we're committing maybe an hour and a half to recording during the week, and then probably 2.5 to 3 hours of editing during the week. So that's kind of like our threshold. We didn't promote it super heavy on social media or worry about any of that because we just didn't want to take the time to do anything more than the episode release and stuff like that. If you want to be a little bit more serious with it, obviously you got to dedicate a little bit more time, but it's just kind of get going and get started is what I would say.
I think that's solid advice. For me, the biggest hindrance, and I guess the biggest thing that honestly, even to this day, I still get nervous about is just the idea of putting myself out there, putting my thoughts and my ideas and my opinions out into the world, out into the internet. And honestly, when that first episode went live back in 2020, when we started uploading, I was so scared and nervous. And I'm like, what are people going to think? I just didn't know what to think. And I was so just scared of like, are we going to get any negative feedback or anything like that? And I just learned to relinquish that and just to let that go. God has appointed us for this. Like, we wanted to do this and we had a desire to it, but we actually really feel as though this was actually something God had called us to in this moment. We really feel as though God had laid in front of us this ability to podcast and to share our stories and to minister to people. And I know that for a fact. I know that He's confirmed that based on the different testimonies and the way people have been ministered. People who are like kind of on the fringe with their faith, some of the episodes that we've done have actually really ministered to them and helped them get back on track. Only God could do that. I don't take credit for that at all. So going back to this idea of just releasing control, totally just not caring at all, knowing that you're putting yourself out there and just your full, authentic, true self and not being afraid of what people are going to think about that. I think there's something so powerful in just living in this freedom of like, I'm just going to go for it. And I'm going to promote it too. I'm going to share this with other people. I'm not just, because that was the other thing too about me is that I did this podcast, but I didn't often tell people about it. It's like, well, what's the point of doing it? The whole point of this podcast is to share our stories. So I'm always like, oh, I don't want to talk about my own podcast when I'm with a group of friends or something. But a lot of them are interested and they want to know and they're looking for something to listen to and they want to hear what you have to say. So if you're going to do this, like, go all in on it, share it, promote it, put yourself out there, and don't be afraid of what comes after that.
I mean, there's always going to be like negatives that you could focus on or pushbacks. And so you just got to get out of your own way in that regard, right? And just like not worry about it. Understand at the beginning, especially, is just going to be a big learning curve and you'll get more comfortable with it. What are just kind of your final thoughts? What do you want to leave the audience with? What do you want to say to kind of wrap up Beyond the Surface?
The first thing is I just want to say thank you to a few different groups of people. The first one is our audience. Many people who have been listening consistently from season 1 all the way until season 3. Many people in the future, people whom we'll never see. Like, I just think of all the people who are listening to this in the year 2024 and the year 2026. Thank you. Thank you for clicking on this episode, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I just found out today, did you know that these are live on Google Podcasts as well? Mm-hmm. I did not know that. I was like, wow, I didn't even know Google has podcasts. But if you are listening to this episode, or if you have listened to any episode before, thank you so much for listening to us and taking a risk and spending your time listening to two guys with really kind of no experience whatsoever, regarding podcasting or editing or ministry, but allowing us to kind of speak into your life. And our prayer is that you would just be ministered to live a life of significance, just to press into the life God has called you to live in with no fear. The second group of people I want to thank are our guests, the people who came on the show and who took a kind of a risk and kind of a chance to join us with this. Our first guest was Brittany. Brittany came on. She's done a number of episodes before. She was amazing. She was the first one and kind of back when we didn't really know what we were doing. And we asked her to be a part of it and she was so willing to do it. So thank you, Brittany. Thank you for your input and wisdom. We had a number of guests in season 2, Sean Calderona, Cy Taylor, Jacob Tabor. I think there was Mike Stinchcomb as well for the finale. Brittany also came back again, which is super nice that she returned. This season, we had my friend Carter. We had our friend Hunter, gave great episodes. Austin Ryder just recently, he had a really long episode. We broke that down. And all these different people, like Beyond the Surface, it's mainly us, but it's not just us. There's all sorts of other people that came alongside us and gave their input and provided a wisdom of their own. And that was huge, and it was such an honor to have everybody on the show, so thank you to you guys. The final person I want to thank is you, Ryan. I'm just super humbled after all this time that you would even ask me and choose me to be your partner in this, and I just thought you were just the coolest person ever. I'm like, wow, like Ryan's asking me to be a part of this, and I was so hyped to do it, and I was like, man, I hope I'm cool enough to do this, sort of a thing. Thank you for taking a chance on me and allowing me to come alongside you and to do this together, and I'm so grateful that we got to experience this. And how many people can say that they did a podcast, Like, I'm just so grateful that we did this together and that we were able to share our stories and put ourselves out there. You taught me so much. You taught me about what's important just with content creation and just what's important in life as well. And I just really grew a lot from this season, not just with the podcasting, but also just in our friendship as well. And with your friendship and mentoring, I just feel like you were able to speak a lot of life into me. And I'm better off because of this podcast, and more importantly, because of you. I'm so grateful for this experience. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, dude. And thank you. Thank you for coming along beside me and doing this. I know I was never really nervous for this, I guess, but I know you were, so I know that was a big step, and I appreciate it. And I second everything that you said. I definitely feel that I'm better because of this. I'm stretched because of this. You have been super supportive and a super good friend through some of the toughest seasons of my life. And so I've just really enjoyed getting to know you, and I really appreciate the support and the wisdom that you've given me. And I'm just super happy to see both of our faith grow, over this season, and super happy to see God's faithfulness manifest in my life, but also in your life. It's super cool. I think you've got an awesome story too. My sister was really ministered to, as she was looking for a job by, your story and how you kind of ended up in your field. And yeah, I second what you said. Thank you to all the guests that came on. We appreciate it. Your episodes were awesome. For any guest that came on, your episode was well received always. Like anytime we had guests on, the episodes got more clicks and more views, which again, we said we're not really worried about that, but I'm just letting you know that other people found that interesting as well. We got a lot of really good feedback from the episodes where we had guests on. So all of you guests were great. We're super thankful that you decided to come along and be a part of this. Then lastly, I just say thank you to everybody who listened. We had a good time doing this. We really appreciate you coming along with the journey. I know that there are some of you listening who have been around since season 1. We really appreciate you. If you haven't been and you're here for season 3, we really appreciate you too. If you're here just for this episode, we really appreciate you. Our goal was just to tell our stories, and so we're glad that you found it interesting enough to listen. We love you guys. We're done, so we're not going to see you back here for another episode. We hope that this helps some of you out or everybody out, and we hope that you guys continue to grow in your faith and continue to walk out a life that's pleasing and honoring to the Lord.
Thanks for joining us for the final episode of Beyond the Surface. We have no plans to continue uploading, but all our previous episodes are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Our show is officially over. We hope you were encouraged to continue loving God and loving people. One last time, thank you so much for tuning in to Beyond the Surface.